Of course, we will be turning to the main topic of the daily debate for tonight. We are a bit short of time. So, Dr. Mohamed Haleem, of course, we know the latest developments regarding the Gaza Strip and what happened in terms of the ceasefire. How do you see the role of Egypt, first of all, in reaching the ceasefire, reinforcing the ceasefire for the upcoming months as well between Israel and Hamas, and more importantly, the prospects of reconstructing the Gaza Strip?
Right. Indeed, the process of reconstructing the demolition, actually, that did occur during the course of Al-Aqsa flood that lasted for more than 1 year, actually, yes, was, in many ways like a sort of a dream. I mean, without the ability of reaching to a consensus of opinion among even the tussling forces, that is Hamas on the one hand, and the Israeli forces on the other. But thanks goodness, actually, I mean, after a large number of series of negotiations, of heartbreaking adventures, so to speak, actually, on the part of the Egyptian presidency, actually, we could reach at the end of the day to a consensus of opinion that would underline a sort of a ceasefire, despite the fact that, I mean, the status quo that we had reached to would seem to be quite very much problematic, turbulent, full of predicaments, but in the meantime, the role of the Egyptian negotiator, the Egyptian presidency actually, was very much successful. I mean, through a large number of phone calls, of meetings, of summits, of arrangements, of, examination of the ins and outs, actually, of the situation on the part of a presidential level as much as on the ministerial level in the meantime. For example, Dr. Badr Ablati, I mean, a couple of days was, attending a sort of a meeting with the American foreign minister, discussing and examining all the bits and pieces and all the details of first, I mean, reaching to a consensus of opinion of perpetuating the sort of the ceasefire. Yes. Because it would come amid sort of menaces and threats on the part of the American administration as much as on the Israeli side. A couple of days ago, we have heard Donald Trump, addressing Saudi Arabia actually of the possibility, of the potentiality of the removal of the Palestinian state to Saudi Arabia, something which is quite reminiscent of what we have heard a couple of, perhaps 4 years ago, during his own first tenure, when he did remove, Jerusalem, as much as the embassy to Jerusalem, and representing Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Israeli entity. I would really say, I wouldn't say state, but yes, entity. It's quite reminiscent of that, but to no avail, because, Saudi Arabia was very much solid in its own side, representing a sort of manifesto, actually, that would address the world community at large, that it would never, ever actually accept any sense of relocation or any sense of displacement, as much as it was indeed until the same time that the Egyptian presidency actually did address the world community at large, that on no account, actually, that sort of nightmarish aspect would come to realistic terminologies, that is, on the part of the Egyptian presidency. So, in more than one respect, you can really find that the sort of solidarity and the sense of the consensus of opinion, the agreement on more than one country, that's Saudi Arabia on the one hand, Jordan on the other, as much as headed by the sort of the courageous and very much realistic and successful manifestos, actually, on the part, yes, of the Egyptian presidency, would come at the end of the day that the act of relocation is never actually to be represented, is never to be discussed, and the sense that the displacement actually is also one of the topics that would seem to be quite not on realistic groundings. Well, to my own understanding, I would really find that Donald Trump, on the other hand, his own terminologies and turns of phrases, his own words would seem to be quite changed completely, about 360-degree turn, after the manifesto on the part of the foreign ministry, actually, of representing the world community at large of, we are always endorsing and we are always behind the establishment of the Palestinian state on the borderlines of the 4th of June 1967. As much as headed by, I would not really say the Eastern Jerusalem, but the sacred Jerusalem, actually. One clear testimony to the sense of the self-confidence on the part of our own presidential authority, of the extreme sense of power, once Donald Trump actually would threaten the Egyptian actually of protracting, if not actually of abstaining from giving the aids and the sort of the helping, instances actually. At the self-same moment, actually, you can really find that the presidential authority would spread a large number of units, of weaponries, of armed forces, actually, to cover almost all bits and pieces of the northern part of Sinai. A clear testimony that we are really there. We would not be negotiating or would not be threatening, actually, the act of going through the military action. But we do have the simple right of defending our own borderlines, to the extent of might be infringing upon what has been said and done during the Camp David Peace Initiative, actually. If there is any sort of infringement and sort of attack on our own borderlines, we are always there, able to defend our own soldiers, our own lands, our own grains, or pieces of our own country. And much same way that you can really find that Donald Trump started in the meantime to change, as I much have said, actually, the terminologies and the way that you would act and react with the Egyptian presidency. For one reason or another, I would really say that perhaps the Arab Summit would a bit postpone to some extent, just by way of collecting as much as, agreements and consensus of opinions among all the Arab countries to reach to a one final destination, which is the avoidance and the rejection and the renouncing of the of the displacement of the Gazas from their own homeland, and much same way that's the representation and the act of, reproducing and transmitting the human and humanitarian aids through the crossings to the indigenous people in there. One of the major facts that perhaps the American administration, as much as the Jewish one, would seem to be quite aware, a clear testimony to what you might say that survival is not only for the fittest, but almost also for the strongest, for the loudest in voice, the sort of the thing that we do really have had a good hand in and a good opinion of representing the sort of the powerful state and the very much loud voice of the Egyptian presidency of changing the status quo. I think that there had been some attempts on the part of other presidents, Arab ones, I would really say, perhaps, King Abdullah II would try to defend their own simple right of just, accepting youngsters to be medically treated. A sort of thing that was to be misinterpreted, that it's an act of accepting and of, condescending actually to the decisions of the Americans as much as the Jews, but far from being so. To our own pride, he would really end his own talk in his own press conference with Donald Trump that would wait till the publication of the Egyptian manifesto, actually, to say its own final say about what would seem to be quite the status quo in the near future.
Yes, Doctor, you mentioned a number of important points, and for the last 5 or 6 minutes of the episode, I would like to focus on the future of the talks, the future of the ceasefire, the future of the Gaza Strip in terms of reconstruction. And this begins on Thursday with Egypt, Jordan, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates will be meeting in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh next Thursday to be discussing the proposal of Donald Trump. This is ahead of the February 27th summit that will be held here in Cairo. What are your expectations for this meeting and that summit?
Day after day, there is a great deal of representation that the Arab nations are very much unified. It did begin with Saudi Arabia, act of denouncing, of rejecting, the American administrative sort of, code, followed by Jordan. And I think United Arab Emirates is quite clear in much the same way that Qatar is almost following the same steps, actually, of the other nations. That's why my own understanding of that sort of summit that will be held in Riyadh will be a sort of bringing almost all the Arab voices together, a sense of togetherness actually to be represented, because the sort of the threatening voices actually are surrounding and besieging almost all the Arab nations, not a single individual country, not even the Palestinian state, not even the Gazas and Gaza Strip, not even the Western Bank, but almost actually to an extent in such a way as to be quite entailing almost all the Arab countries. That's why I would really expect that the Arab nation and the forthcoming summit that will be held in Riyadh will be, ending at the end of the day with one final testimony, which is the rejection, the denial of almost any sort of relocation of, displacement of the Gazas, and of concentrating much too much actually on the act of reconstruction, particularly Egypt, was, pushing a very good hand and representing a good idea of its own ability, of its own potentiality actually to rehabilitate and to reconstruct the demolished houses and residences and apartments and that. Despite the fact that the American administration at one stage did publicize that it would need more than 15 years. But to their own amazement, to their own astonishment, actually, the Egyptian presidency represented its own ability, actually, financially, physically, and almost on all the means of its own disposal to rebuild Gaza and to never ever to accept the act of relocation. And what seems to be quite very much interesting is the fact that that will be, done, consummated, despite almost all the allegations and the false consumptions on the part of the American administration that, it would be turned into what you might call a Rivera, that, the sort of the indigenous citizens would be out of it. The sort of reconstruction will be done in the due course of time, with the abiding places actually and the existence of the Gazas into the inside of their own indigenous lands. That's why I think this is the biggest challenge. We are very much proud of what has been said and done. When all is said and done, actually I would really say that we almost all, as all the Egyptians, we are very much proud of the very much courageousness, of the courageous ability and the potentiality on the part of the presidential authority to say no. At a time where almost all the nations and all the European countries and the superpowers wouldn't obtain that sort of ability to say so to Donald Trump, who is supposed to be the most powerful sort of president, not only in America, but actually in the Middle East. What seems to be, also I know that we are running fast, yes. But what seems to be quite very much interesting is a sort of comparative study, a sort of comparison between what has been said and done during the course of the revolution of the 25th of January in 2011, when, the American administration, would order the previous president, now means now, sir, that you would have to leave. Yes. Now then, in 2025, our own presidential authority was very much courageous to say, no means no, sir. So, a great deal of changing the map of the road, a great deal of safety and security, of decision taken and decision making actually on the part of our own presidential authority that would leave its deep impact not only almost on the Egyptian people but almost on almost all the world, striking a very good example of what leadership ought to be in such a very much marvelous and fascinating way, I would really say.
Yes, and finally, Doctor, in the last 2 minutes of the episode, what does this say about Egypt and the Egyptian president and the Egyptian leadership that you mentioned that no means no? We would not be acting such proposals by the U.S. president, and we would not be acting on this plan of liquidating the Palestinian cause on the benefit of the Palestinians and harming the benefits of the Palestinians and the Egyptian sovereignty, as well as the Jordanian one as well.
To their own amazement, to the American administration amazement, they wouldn't really expect, they wouldn't have expected in such a very much daring and courageous way, actually, to say, as you might have really said now. And I think that Donald Trump himself, from the way he would act and react, from the way he would send, the leader or chairman of the Jewish Congress to discuss and to examine all the bits and pieces and almost all the details of the reconstruction, something that was never ever to be dreamt of. In much the same way that the head of the American Parliament was discussing at the same time with Dr. Badr Abdulati, the foreign minister of foreign affairs and of migration, actually discussing the ways and the means and the potentialities of reaching to a consensus of opinion. At one and the same time, a clear testimony to what sort of distinctive success our own president reached to, changing the whole map, not only of the road, of the word, but actually of the way they would act and react. They would negotiate with us as perhaps the most strong, powerful voice actually to be heard and to be negotiated with in the Middle East.
Yes, Dr. Mohamed Haleem, the political analyst and the member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
My pleasure, sir.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you next week.